Good morning. Welcome to week 9 of the fall 2018 semester. This week we're going to look at two things as we start trying to close out the Victorian period. The first one we're going to look at is the woman question. And it may sound weird to say the woman question, but that's what was going on at the end of the Victorian period, or really throughout the Victorian period. The question is, what role should women play? Should they just be wives and mothers, or should they get out and maybe get jobs? Or should they be allowed to do things like ride bicycles, of all things? That was not an easy question to answer, because you had the old conservative bunch that said the woman should just be a mom and a wife and that's it. And then you had the more progressive side that said, yes, let's give women rights, let's give them opportunities, let's give them whatever we need. So read the woman question introduction in the textbook, and then look at two different readings from that era. One is by John Ruskin, called Of Queen's Gardens. John Ruskin actually was an educator who ran a school for girls. So he was all about educating girls into becoming women. And you're going to see that he is the old school. He says that the woman's job is to be the provider of the home, to be basically the arranger. She runs the house within the four walls of the house. And then he says that the man's job is to go out into the world and to fight all the fights and to make all the money and to basically be the adventurer, if you will, while the woman stays at home and is the domestic. Then on the flip side of that, you got Walter Besant, The Queen's Reign. This is written towards the end of Queen Victoria's reign. And it's interesting I mentioned Queen Victoria, because here is a woman who was the Queen of England and would be for about 60 years. And even though she was in charge, she did not come out and say that she was for women's rights. She kind of was old school. In fact, she was perfectly happy to let her husband actually run the country up until his death, and then she had to step forward and do it. So the Queen's Reign looks back and talks about, here's what the women were like 40 years ago, here's what the women are like today. And the woman is much more independent and much more demanding during Besant's time. She's now allowed to have careers that she would not have been allowed to have at the beginning of Queen Victoria's reign. But towards the end of Queen Victoria's reign, these women can have these certain careers. And there's a couple that are still shut out for her. She still can't be a priest, she still can't be an attorney, but he says, even in what he's saying, well, that's going to change. And eventually it would, sometime after the publication of that work. So that's the woman question. And it was a big topic of debate during the Queen Victorian period. Then we get into imperialism. And take a look at the slideshow I have on imperialism. Take a look at the reading. And, of course, take a look at the introduction to imperialism. And, of course, the readings that I have for that, which are both about India. At one time, Britain was able to claim dominion over 1/4 of all the land mass in the entire world. Think about that for a minute. The earth is 2/3 water and then 1/3 land. But of that 1/3 of land, England claimed dominion, or sovereignty, if you will, over 1/4 of all of that. That included places like Canada, Australia, parts of Antarctica. The list goes on and on. And England was not gentle in how it ruled a lot of these places. In fact, England was actually very violent in the way that it ruled a lot of these places. And you're going to see a pair of readings here. The first one is Minute on Indian Education by a man you've seen before, who is Thomas Babington Macaulay. You'll remember that in the industrialism readings, he was the one who argued that England was actually prosperous, despite the fact that all the wealth was being moved upward. And he's going to make the argument here that Indian children should be educated in English and not their native Indian tongues. And by Indian, of course, we mean the people of India, not, the Native American Indians. And he's going to make a case for why English is a superior language to any other language, including that of the native Indians. And he's going to be pretty arrogant about it, quite frankly. And I think you're going to see that not only is he arrogant about the fact that English should be the language, but not all Indians are smart enough to learn English. So what he says to do is take the brightest ones and teach them English, and then have those kids teach the other Indian kids. So it's really a very pro-English, pro-Indian argument that you still see people say today when they say, if you come to America, you got to speak English. Whereas other parts of the world, most countries have more than one language that they speak. So that's the Babington reading. And then if you've got the other side of the coin, which was by William Howard Russell from My Diary in India. And that's going to follow something called the Kanpur massacre. And essentially what happened was some people from India actually rebelled against the English that had kind of set up their homes in their neighborhood in India, and had built these big walls, and all the wealth was going to the English, while the native Indians were actually living in poverty. And the English, of course, were a little racist towards the folks from India because they had darker skin color. And eventually these folks from India got tired of it, and they basically performed a massacre where they killed every English man, woman, and child in Kanpur. And the bodies were piled up by the time that Russell got there and started looking at the scene. And then he's going to ask the question, well, can you really blame the Indians? And he's going to make the case that maybe it was inevitable that there was going to be some kind of rebellion somewhere because of the fact that the English were not treating the Indians very well in the Indians' own homeland. So those are the imperialism ones. So 4 readings, all very short, and then of course the quiz, and of course the paper. So that's it. I hope that you find this week's readings enlightening, and of course if you always have questions, you can always email me about them.